Chapter 14 is going to deal with the presidency. And as I said at the end of Chapter 13, the first thing we want to look at is we want to kind of connect Congress and the presidency through the legislative process. As we remember from our little Schoolhouse Rock video from elementary school, a bill has to go through the Congress and the presidency before it can become a law. This video is going to take a real quick look at what happens to a bill after Congress is done with it. After Congress has passed a bill through both the House of Representatives and the United States Senate in the exact same format, we call that bill an enrolled bill. And an enrolled bill is sent to the President for him to take action on it. And a couple of things you need to remember about the President and legislation. First of all, a piece of legislation must go all the way through Congress and all the way through the presidential action process within 1 year. If a bill makes it all the way to the President's desk and the congressional session ends, that bill will die, and it has to go back to the beginning of the process. Another thing you must remember about the President and legislative process is that the Constitution is very specific, that Congress must give the President 10 days to decide what he wants to do with a piece of legislation. This will be very important later in this video. So let's talk about what happens to a bill when it gets to the President's desk. The President can do several things when the bill makes it to his desk. The first and most obvious thing he can do is he can sign the bill, and the bill becomes a law. Very straightforward process. If a bill has passed through the House and the Senate in the exact same format, and it goes to the President, and he wants that bill to become a law, he simply signs it. The next thing the President can do with a piece of legislation is he can simply veto it. And the word veto simply means I forbid. And if there's a bill that the President doesn't like, even though it has passed through both chambers of Congress, the President still has the power to veto that bill. And in most cases, when the President vetoes a bill, the bill dies. But there is one option that Congress has if the President vetoes a bill. If Congress can get 2/3 of each House of Congress to vote to override the presidential veto, then the bill becomes a law without the President's signature. And this is very important because this one word, 2/3 of each House, has to override the presidential veto. Not 2/3 of Congress, because you can have 2/3 of the 535 members of Congress vote to override a presidential veto without the veto being overridden. And the way that would happen is, let's say you have 435 members of the House of Representatives that votes to override a presidential veto, but only 65 members of the Senate. What happens is if you add 65 and 435, you come up with 500, and 500 votes is more than 2/3 of Congress. But if you only get 65 votes in the Senate, that 65 votes is not 2/3 of the Senate. So in order for the Congress to override a presidential veto, you must have 2/3 of the Senate, which is at least 67 votes, and 2/3 of the House of Representatives. They have to do it separately. Once Congress overrides the presidential veto, that bill becomes law without the President's signature. Now, there are two other options that the President has. When the President gets a bill, he can let the bill sit on his desk for 10 days. And if he simply lets the bill sit on his desk for 10 days, after 10 days, the bill becomes law without his signature. The other option he has is he can refuse to sign the bill and let the bill die. Now, these are two different options the President has with a bill, and which one he uses depends on how much time is left in Congress. Remember, we said that the congressional session will start on a certain date and it'll end on a certain date. And remember, the Constitution says the President must have 10 days to decide what he wants to do with a piece of legislation. If there are less than 10 days to go in Congress and the President gets the bill, He is not given his 10 days that the Constitution says he needs to have. So after Congress ends, that bill dies. That's called a pocket veto. If there is more than 10 days left to go in this congressional session and the President receives the bill, the President is given his 10 days to decide what he wants to do with the bill. And if he makes no decision after the 10th day, that bill becomes law without his signature. Why would the President allow a bill become law without his signature? Well, it's very simple. If there's a law and the President doesn't know if that's going to be a good law or a bad law, he would let it become law without his signature. Because what happens is, if the bill becomes a law and it turns out to be a bad law, he can say, hey, I didn't sign that bill. But if that bill turns out to be a good law, then the President can say, hey, I could have vetoed it, but I let it become a law. So it's a political thing. Make sure you understand those four options the President has with a piece of legislation, or what we call an enrolled bill. He can sign it, it becomes law. He can veto the bill, and the bill dies unless Congress overrides the presidential veto. He can refuse to sign the bill, and after 10 days it becomes law. Or he can refuse to sign the bill, and if Congress ends before the constitutional 10 days are passed, then the bill dies without the President's